Welcome back to Podcast Recovery, everyone. We're your hosts, David O.
And Eric V.
Today we are joined in studio for the first time in a while. It's always good to say.
Special.
By our special friend, Victoria. How are you doing?
I'm good. How are you?
That's the first time I've ever associated you as a special friend. It sounded weird.
Oh.
It does sound a little weird.
It sounds weird.
Just the connotation.
Our
of
good
that,
friend.
You know? There we go.
Our good friend, Victoria. There we go.
There
we'll fix this in post. It's fine.
we won't.
No, we won't.
Never do.
No.
All right. How are you doing today?
I'm good.
Good.
A little tired, but good.
I hear you. Where are you from, Victoria?
I'm from central Pennsylvania, a little town called Pine Grove Mills, Pennsylvania.
All right. And when were you first introduced to recovery?
I believe it was in 2010, but I didn't get clean until 2012.
And how long have you been clean and abstinent?
I've been clean for coming up on 8 years. In February, it'll be 8 years. And then I've been abstinent from compulsive food behaviors since July. So I believe I have 88 days clean abstinent.
Nice. Well, congratulations. And with all that out of the way, I'm going to turn it over to you to share your story with us. So take it away.
So, I, like I said, am originally from central Pennsylvania, a little tiny town, population of like 1,400.
Are you Amish?
No, but actually, my dad's side of the family was originally Mennonite.
Really?
So, not going to go into huge story with that. But my, 9 generations back, grandpa was the first Mennonite bishop to come to this country. So, cool. Yeah, my lineage is Mennonite on the my dad's side.
So what happened?
I don't know.
Well, yeah, I guess.
I have no idea.
Yeah.
That's another podcast.
Yeah, exactly.
Podcast.
Whole different
Yeah.
conversation. But anyway, so I'm originally from this little tiny town, and it's a little town that's outside of State College, Pennsylvania, which is where Penn State, the Penn State University is located. So I grew up around a college town, college campus, and part of that was that my parents owned a bar. It wasn't directly in State College; it was actually in our tiny little town, but there was a draw to it because of the campus, and so that was part of my upbringing. Was that I grew up in a bar. Both my parents struggled with alcohol. My mother still does. My dad actually passed away when I had about 14 months clean, sort of as a result of his alcoholism, and a bunch of other things. But it was a strange upbringing. Growing up in the bar, I spent most evenings in the bar. I'd go to school and then come home and then, be hanging out at the bar. And most of my friends when I was 6 or 7 years old were just people who went to the bar regularly, like intense alcoholics. I used to play hangman with this guy that died in his mid-50s from, just the result of his drinking. We called him Mr. Walker. Yeah. So I had a really strange, socialization as a child. And then I also had very weird relationships with my parents because of their alcoholism. And so from a really young age, I felt very alone. It felt like there wasn't a lot of love in my household. There was a lot of, and it comes, with sort of being a child of an alcoholic, this flip-flop with my parents where sometimes they were really fun and very loving, and other times they'd fight really intensely or take anger out on us in an abusive way. So it was really challenging, and I felt like I didn't have resources, people to talk to. Again, growing up in this really strange setting, and then also just feeling like kind of the black sheep in school sort of laid the foundation for really, really feeling very different and just genuinely sad from a really young age, which for me, just jumping straight into it, between my parents and the people that I associated with at the bar, the, I guess, solution to dealing with problems, at least that I saw, was to drink. And this was not just my immediate family. Alcoholism and addiction run on both sides of my family. And so I was seeing that all the time. And so for me, the solution I saw was to drink and then subsequently to get high from a pretty young age. So I believe I had my first drink when I was about 10. And then it sort of grew from there. And so, like I mentioned, I'm both clean, but I'm also abstinent. And so I want to be able to tell my story from the context of my relationship with drugs and alcohol, but also my relationship with food. So something kind of important to note for me was that as a child, I was also really overweight. And in addition to sort of some of the more standard abuse and emotional kind of strangeness in my family, my mother especially very much projected that I was less than because of my weight, you know, telling me I couldn't do certain things because I looked a certain way, or I was not athletic, or I couldn't do that because I wouldn't be able to keep up with the other kids. My mom was putting us on diets, my brother and I, from a young age. Wasn't able to like drink regular soda or do any of these things. And so, you know, that only bred more self-loathing, more isolation, more feelings of being different. So at the same time as I started turning to substances, I also started acting in manipulative and controlling ways with food to deal with how I was feeling, but also to try and like change the way that I looked. And so both of those things in my story run parallel. If I'm being honest, you know, drugs and alcohol for me were a pretty straightforward progression, you know, where it started, and then it was fun, and then it got really shitty, and then there were consequences, and then subsequently, you know, it wasn't like completely straightforward, but subsequently through, you know, just creating more and more of a mess, I ultimately got clean. But some context with the food is that I would consider that my primary addiction. It's been something that's been around longer than the drugs and alcohol and has persisted through my entire recovery. And I've only really just started addressing it. So like I have to consider for me what recovery means is recovery from multiple things. So anyway, back to what I was saying, as the drinking started when I was younger, I started acting on some kind of early restrictive behaviors with food where I would skip meals or place rules on what I could eat. I started weighing myself. I started being really aware of how much bigger or how much, especially I was very tall when I was a kid, so how much taller or, you know, how much space I took up in the world. And that drove the beginnings of this obsession with changing the way that I looked, in addition, again, through substances, changing the way I felt. And so that was about middle school, I want to say. But for me, like the breadth and like the intense part of my story for both my eating disorder and my eating issues and my addiction began in like early high school. So I recall being a little, I don't know, I had gained weight. So I guess something to note is that I went to Catholic school growing up for like 9 years, from like kindergarten until 8th grade. And then that was very sheltered, gave me all these wonderful issues with religion. You know, kind of just throw all that into the mix of growing up in this like very dysfunctional household, right? And then transferred to the regular high school and like had this complete culture shock. Like I'd always worn uniforms, and then all of a sudden it was like, oh, I can wear like real people clothes and people cuss and like do, it was like very strange. And, you know, and like I had already started some of these, you know, like I had mentioned, behaviors because of growing up where I did, but coming into there, I just like, I got so swept away with like the change and like really let that affect me. And so I want to say that it was at that time, prior to that, I had been struggling with some restrictive behaviors. At that time, I had started overeating. And so I had gained a bit more weight, like my freshman year or so. Also was drinking, also was, kind of just like assimilating, getting involved with like unhealthy relationships. Like I was from the get-go, just acting on like shitty, unhealthy, destructive behaviors, right? And it wasn't until probably the beginning of my sophomore year of high school that I had determined in my mind that like I needed to make some changes, and that like I wanted to wear fashionable clothing. I wanted to be pretty. I wanted to, do all these things. And so I like determined I was going to go on this like really strict diet, and I was going to like really start working out, and I was going to try and cut back on some of my drug use, and I was going to, revamp my whole life. And like what that ultimately turned into was probably over maybe 4 or 5 months of 35 to 40 pound weight loss. And then it just dropped from there. And then also the start of a habit with what was like what I would consider my drug of choice, which was like uppers. So at that time, it was pretty consistently like amphetamines. And that pretty much persisted until I got clean. But it wasn't until that was really a turning point for me, was that whole experience with that weight loss, because I recognized finally that there was an issue. People started bringing up the fact, like, you look like a skeleton, you look bad, you aren't living. And I determined that maybe I needed to do something different, but I was scared. And it was at that point that I started experiencing a lot of obsession with food. And then suddenly I felt trapped in the cycle of the eating disorder. Before that, it felt like a choice, but then it suddenly became this part of my life that to this day I still struggle with every day. And so it's been like 12 years, I think, since that happened. But I was at my worst probably in summer 2009, under 100 pounds. Yeah. Under 100 pounds, was running 5 or 6 miles a day. I think
You're like 5'8"?
5'7".
5'7"?
Yeah.
That's very small for somebody that height.
I was like 40 pounds less than I currently weigh.
Goodness.
Yeah. And I, the obsession with food, and then the desire to be thin, this conflicting idea of like wanting to not be obsessed with food, but at the same time feeling completely in the grips of it, just drove me insane. I don't know. That was a really dark time in my life. And so the solution to that was to just use a bunch of drugs.
Yeah.
Got to the point where, for me, I had so much trouble dealing with the symptoms of my eating disorder that I started saying, like, fuck it, I'm just going to get high. And then my addiction grew from there.
That seems like a terrible revolving cycle. Like, oh, I do drugs because I don't like my eating disorder, and I eat because I don't like my drug disorder. So it's just beep-a-doop-a-doop-a-doop.
Yep, it was awful.
Yeah.
It was like, for me, getting high was the only way I could escape this other addiction. And so it wasn't even like there was, I was running away from like some basic ass problems. Like
Yeah,
I was
it's just
literally just trying
pick your poison.
to self-medicate. And so I created a lot of damage through that. I because I was just unwell, I was struggling with mental illness, pretty much from a really young age. And then, coming into this time, whether or not it was the nutritional component of it or just in general, like living with mental illness, I was a really unhappy person. But I caused a lot of drama because I was a really self-centered, very sad person, to the point that, at the end of, I guess, my junior year of high school, I had a suicide attempt, and like very nearly died. It was an overdose. And it was at that point that I went into my first treatment facility. And I was pretty heavily using before going into there. I would say that there was probably a 2-year period where the eating disorder was prevalent, but the drugs were definitely, the forefront issue. And it was like very obvious, from a like unmanageability perspective. I lost a lot of friends. I stole a lot of money. My family didn't trust me. All those kind of things that you hear are the result of using, right? And that's like the complicated thing about the relationship between like food for me and then also drugs, was that it was easy for me to see the unmanageability that was caused by my drug use, but with food, so much of that was internal. And so I justified that like the only person I was damaging, and it was hard for me to even see that I was truly damaging myself. The only person that was being harmed was me. So the point being, to get back on track, I went into treatment and somebody suggested to me like, hey, maybe you have a drug problem. And I was like, I don't know about that.
Yeah.
Maybe. I don't know. But I ended up leaving that treatment facility, and through a guy that I was dating at the time who was also getting high, because everyone I associated was getting high.
Of course.
Yeah. He was like, let's go to an NA meeting. And I was like, what the heck's that? Okay, sure. He's like, maybe you can sponsor me. And I was like, okay,
Solid
I'll
plan.
do that. I know what I'm doing.
Yeah.
But anyway, so I went to a meeting, and it's also worth noting I was really young. I got clean young. And going into those meetings, I really identified with what people were talking about, but I also compared out because I was so young and I was really not interested I really wanted the ability to go to college and party and all these things. So although I got introduced to recovery pretty early, and, while I
forget about that.
Yeah.
You're 19, right?
18.
18.
Yeah.
I totally forgot about that.
Yeah.
Wow.
It was, yeah. It's like I have a good relationship with it today, but, there was a time where I was like, oh, I was too young or whatever. And that's what drove that initial time going. I was like, oh, I want to be able to go to college and I want to have, the college experience.
I want to fit in,
whatever.
be normal.
Yeah, exactly. So anyway, I attempted to try and get clean, but like really didn't have a commitment to it, and experienced that whole like, I had a head full of recovery, quote unquote, or at least some recovery concepts, but immediately went back to using and picked up right where I left off. And so the bulk and the worst of my using was, senior year of high school / going into my freshman year of college. Again, all the while still struggling with food here, never removing the food from the equation, crazy weight fluctuation, periods of purging, whatever. In that time, during senior year, I think I went into a treatment facility again. I don't know. It was just a whole mess, right? And then it wasn't until I was in college, my first semester at a school up in PA, this small school where I all those feelings of not fitting in when I was in Catholic school, because I was different, because I was kind of a weirdo, I was kind of a fucking nerd. Like, all that came back because I was at this like bougie trust fund kid school, And so like my solution was to just like
What school was it?
Bucknell University.
You went to Bucknell?
I did.
That's a really
For
good
a
school.
semester.
Oh,
Yeah.
shit. Nice.
I did well in school, in high school.
It is kind of bougie, though.
Oh, man. It was...
Anybody listening from Bucknell, you're kind of bougie. Just admit it to yourself. It's okay.
You know, it works for some people. Where I was at in my life, it didn't work for me.
Yeah.
And I respect that. I think a problem with that, my experience there was Bucknell's a kind of a bubble, in that like the school itself is like all these people from Maryland, actually. Partially why I ended up in Maryland was because I was dating a guy at Bucknell that I was getting high with.
From Howard County.
From Howard County.
Of course.
Yeah,
Yeah,
exactly.
makes sense.
Yeah. So anyway, that's part of my story. I'll get there. But like,
Is that who I think it is?
Yeah, probably.
He went to Bucknell?
yeah.
That's surprising.
Again, it's
I could never have guessed that.
yeah.
Huh. Okay, moving on.
And yeah, no, it's okay. So, it was a bubble where, and this kind of fed some of, the end result for me, where I felt isolated in this setting of like, oh, you need to have the expensive $300 fry boots and like long blonde hair and all this stuff, in this bubble at Bucknell. But then outside of there, it was this tiny little town with a terrible drug problem close to Williamsport, which is like a shitty other town in PA. There's pretty much just like...
That's where Shane's from.
Yeah, exactly. Shane and I conspire on that all the time.
That's where the Little League World Series
Yep.
is.
It's great. That's its claim to fame.
I remember things.
Yeah.
Apparently, yeah.
But, so my solution to dealing with feeling isolated and alone and then carrying in a habit of some heavy drugs from, just before I started school was to just pretty much fuck off, not go to class. I played a lot of League of Legends.
Ooh,
Yeah,
nice.
good times. Get real high.
God damn you.
And just like drink and drug till I, was at the point where I was failing my classes. And I think if I continued, I probably would have committed suicide. I just couldn't deal with it, and so I reached the end of that semester and was aware that if I had chosen to stay, I would have had a 0.0 for the semester. Or I was given the option to leave medically and go into treatment. So I went into my third treatment facility, which was a local rehab. And that was kind of the start of my process of recovery. And so this was late 2011. I think I got out right before New Year's or something. So I went to that program and then got out, stayed clean a couple days, relapsed for a little bit. And the thing I can say about that was I hear in recovery all the time, I'm just like one bad decision away from getting high or one bad decision away from a drink or a drug. And it was as simple as like somebody offered me something and I was like, okay. And I pretty much convinced myself like I could do it. And if it weren't for a guy that I was dating, I don't know if I would have gotten clean when I did, but I don't overthink it. I just know that February 1st, 2012, that day I didn't want to get high, and then since then I've been clean, and thank God for that. But so I had an interesting beginning to my recovery. Like I mentioned, I was dating a guy at Bucknell that was from kind of a bougie county in Maryland. And
Which county?
Howard County.
Oh, yeah, we're bougie.
Yeah. So I was dating him. He went into rehab when I went into rehab. We used to write each other letters. It was just some, some mad.
What high school did he go to?
He went to Glenelg.
Oh, yeah. Okay. He's super bougie, Howard County.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's not Oakland Mills.
No, it's not ghetto Howard County.
True.
I'm in the poor part of Howard County. Yay!
Yeah, I guess there's a divide, but
Oh, 100%. 100%.
So anyway, this guy, we were still dating, and part of the reason I got clean was he showed up at my house in PA without letting my mom know I knew, but I didn't really tell my mom, and she was like, obviously not too happy with me. I just blew a lot of money on, a very expensive education and wasn't doing anything, and, she was pretty hurt from my drug use and all of those things. And anyway, so he showed up, and immediately there was just like crazy drama. And the result of that pretty much was that my brother and I got in an argument. It got physical, and then I like threatened to call the cops, and it was all this just like early recovery, not even recovery, early being clean bullshit. And the guy I was dating and I's solution was like, well, let's just go to Maryland.
We're gonna run away.
Yeah. So in an hour decision, we uprooted and came to Maryland. I had 20 days clean, and I have lived here ever since. And that is how I ended up in Maryland.
It's kind of amazing.
Geographic change
It's incredible.
can work.
They can work.
Can work.
They can work. Not for everyone,
Yes.
but
No,
it worked for you.
It worked really well for me, and I definitely wouldn't say that it's necessary, but I believe that I believe in a higher power. Won't get too much into that, but I believe in something, greater that gives me opportunities to look for lessons in life. And I think that I was given that opportunity, and thank God for it, because the recovery I found down here, the people I found down here, and the life that I've created down here is nothing that I would have had growing up in the town that I was in, and I know that because my brother still struggles dealing with being unable to escape like where I came from. So anyway, I came down here, and took me a little while. Where I'm from, again, the population of my hometown, like 1,400 people, like suddenly uprooting to Maryland.
1,400 people?
Yeah.
Damn.
That's like the size of one of the high schools around
The high school
here.
I went to had probably
like 2,000.
No,
Two or
like
three?
I think now it's like 4,000.
Gainesville?
Gainesville has like 4,000
Jesus.
people.
That's insane.
When I graduated, we had less than 1,000.
When I graduated, the freshman class was over 1,000 kids.
Ugh.
So my class was like 500, so it had doubled.
See,
since-
I know everybody from my graduating class.
I don't.
You probably had like 50?
I mean, so
No, because you
My
probably
home-
had like a whole county. high
yeah, it
school.
was the
Yeah.
whole area. There
Yeah.
was one high school for the
Yeah.
entire area. That's why I came down here, and there was all this like, I went to this high school, went to this high school. And it's like we had one high school,
Yeah.
which for better or for worse.
Yeah.
For me,
Hey.
for worse, because everyone knew me as the fucking anorexic drug addict girl who tried to,
So it helps the geographic change because no one knows who you
Yes, it does. And
Back on track.
are.
yeah, to get back to
Yeah.
the story, thank God for multiple reasons, and that I created essentially a new life, or was given the opportunity to create a life down here. But also, like, going home is really hard because I still see people I know, and I had a reputation, and it's nice that it didn't necessarily have to follow me here. But anyway, so I moved down here and was like completely like culture shocked.
Oh, yeah.
I'd like never driven on roads with medians before. Like driving on like 4-lane highways was like incredibly scary. I
I can
couldn't
imagine, yeah.
Yeah, and like then going to meetings in this area. So like I said, I tried to go to meetings when I was younger, and my experience with that was like I related, and they were intimate. It was like 10 people, everyone knew each other. I remember going to a meeting to pick up my 30-day key tag, and it was a very, very good friend of mine's 2-year anniversary. And I went up and got the key tag and then like cried because
Who
there
was
was
it?
I don't want to use names, but
Okay.
yeah, a good friend. And yeah, I cried. I was like, I didn't know how to deal with like the quantity of people here. And so it actually took me a little bit of time to finally start coming to meetings and like seeking recovery. So it probably wasn't until I had about 6 months clean that I started consistently going to meetings. And pretty much what that ultimately turned into was I started going to this meeting. It's like at midnight in the area that I lived in. Met some cool people, started to relate, was still living with this guy that was, the guy I met at Bucknell that was really awful. I started to realize that he was not a good person, that he was very manipulative.
Yeah.
And through being in recovery, through making some relationships in recovery, I realized I needed to leave. And I, essentially leaned on people in my life that I met down here to help me get through ending that relationship and then pretty much just like striking it out on my own. And, that was sort of like the real true start to what recovery meant for me. And that was probably with like a year and a half clean. So that's been, that was pretty much like the path for me, is that I just like got out of that relationship and then just really sunk my heels into this recovery process. I have been in school, or had been in school for pretty much all my recovery. That was a really hard thing for me when I got clean, was that I really let myself down because school mattered a lot to me. I think it just came from growing up around a college town. Everyone went to school, etc. And so I struggled a lot, but eventually, a couple years into recovery, last year actually, 7.5 years from graduating from high school, finally got my 4-year degree. And, there's all these gifts that come with recovery. I was able to get a job that matters to me. All these really wonderful things. And I say all this because, like, I don't want to downplay the fact that recovery has granted me a lot of really excellent things. Friendships, support, a better relationship with myself, etc. All these external things. I have a car I like, whatever. But I need to note that during the time that I've been clean, I've struggled very intensely with food this entire time. They say, and I really believe this, this is, drugs are just a symptom of the problem. And like I mentioned, the food stuff was running in parallel with the drugs. So when the drugs were taken away, the food stuff came back like with a vengeance. And so since I've been in recovery, I've struggled with both sides of my relationship with food. Probably had 3 or 4 significant anorexia relapses since I've been clean. And then I had a couple periods of bad binge eating. And it's like really crazy for me to say that here because I'm pretty accepting of my story when it comes to the drug use side of it. I've shared my story so many times, and like really my story's straightforward. I fucked shit up. There were consequences. I got clean. But for me, there's so much shame wrapped up in the idea of like going to food as a solution, especially as somebody who struggled with the other side of that, not going to food as a solution. So admitting that like I would binge eat until I would throw up, especially in recovery, was something I couldn't tell people until recently, until getting abstinent. So point being that I struggled with all these things, and although I was getting better in a lot of ways and recovery was helping me stay clean and my relationships with people were improving, etc., I really was unwilling to look at food as something I could address through a program of recovery. And so I let food continue to make decisions for me. I have gone through periods of being better with food, but pretty much since, let's see, May of 2018, I've been like pretty intensely struggling. And if I'm being honest, I'm still struggling to this day. And that's okay, you know. I'm just coming in here to share my story and be honest. But that process of recovery is still very forefront for me. Whereas I feel like I don't obsess about drugs anymore, and I don't, you know, I've lost that desire to use. I still struggle daily with the desire to over or under eat. And there's been a lot of like physical consequences to that, etc. And a big part of it was just that like the obsession with food was really intense, and it just was really depressing because, you know, I was like, why I'm clean, and like why am I still unhappy, you know. Just like reflecting intensely on all of this, to the point that eventually, over this past summer, I sought out going to another fellowship that's specifically oriented towards food behaviors. And since going there, I feel like I was able to start, the willingness to start looking at food as something I could address through a 12-step program finally grew. And I made the decision to get abstinent in the end of July of this year. And it's been really interesting because it's a process. Unlike for me getting clean, and for at least I know for both of you, getting clean means complete and total abstinence from all, you know, mind and mood altering substances.
Can't do that with food.
We can't do that with food. You know, they say like you gotta let the, you know, the demon out, you know, 3 or 4 times a day. That's just how it is. And so like learning how to not act compulsively with food or act with positive intention and integrity with food has been incredibly challenging.
Yeah.
Because I can't just take it away. And as much as like there's a part of me that wants to, it's something that I have to live with, right? So that process has been really new. It's been very strange as somebody who's been coming around to 12-step fellowship for almost 8 years now to suddenly re-immerse myself in another 12-step fellowship and be a newcomer. It's, you know, it's like I can't let myself and like my experience necessarily get in the way of the fact that like I'm inexperienced in that regard, that I spent a lot of time like literally just choosing to be unwilling to let a power greater than myself make decisions about food for me. You know what I mean? Or at least giving that power to something greater than me and, you know, not manipulating every situation with food, etc. That's been a really strange process, but ultimately a really good thing, because I feel like I've started, you know, my journey towards recovering from food, at least at this point, is better than it's ever been. But it is still a daily struggle. So that's most of my story. I guess I would say that, you know, recovery for me is right now really transient. I feel confident and appreciative and grateful for all of the things that recovery has given me over almost 8 years. But I also recognize that I'm still at a point where I have a lot to grow, and that I've very fortunately been given the opportunities recently to really re-engage in my recovery, because, you know, this disease is life or death, and I want to live today. And it's time, you know, to finally start looking at some of these things that I spent many years not looking at, even as somebody who is clean, whether or not it was out of pride or out of fear. You know, this is where I'm at today. So, yeah, I think that's pretty much most of my story.
Cool.
Yeah, thanks for letting me share that. That's the first time I've ever really talked about my relationship with food. So That was really cool.
Less nervous?
A little bit, yes.
Like you're just talking to us. We've been
Yeah,
talking
exactly.
We've known you
8 years.
for 8
Yeah.
years,
Fair.
exactly.
Real quick question. Like this just came to mind. So with a 12-step fellowship related to food-related issues, how would step 8 and 9 work? Would it mostly just be like amends to yourself?
Well, I can't personally speak to it because I'm currently like on a lower step than that in the fellowship. But I mean, I believe it's similar process,
Yeah.
because like,
But like, who could you owe an amends to over a food? I guess.
well, it's like maybe you just can't relate because you haven't struggled
Yeah.
with food in that
Yeah.
way. But there's been a lot of instances where I've avoided people or I've canceled plans or I've been manipulative with food towards people. I can give examples like people I've dated in particular. I would shame them a lot for their food decisions or be very controlling with what they were allowed to eat. And so there's a lot of ways actually that, and then of course, like, just like drugs and alcohol, food robs me of my peace of mind or my ability to be available to the people that matter to me.
Yeah.
So when I prioritize food over, say, spending time with my family or whatever, I'm doing my family harm, right?
Yeah.
Because I'm saying, okay, I'd rather sit inside and binge eat than spend time with my family. So it's just that it's a lot more quiet. And that's why, again, it was a lot harder for me to start looking at it as something that was actually harmful to other people.
Wow.
Yeah.
That blew my mind. Okay, Eric, go.
All right. So, let's see.
That blew my mind. I never
Okay,
thought of that.
so restricting and binge eating. Me personally, familiar with both as well. So something that's hard, at least for me, is kind of the balance. So recently, and this is like more of like a gastrointestinal issue, I had to change my diet to like figure some stuff out from like a GI perspective. But I'm definitely on the scale every day, and I'm like looking at weight, and I am obsessing about it. So I've lost 26 pounds since July, which I'm thrilled, and I'm totally fine with. I don't give a fuck right now. I'm okay with it. But there is like a fine line. Technically, at this exact moment, I'm exactly my perfect weight for my body type, and like for how tall I am. Like I've gone to the doctor. I know when I was in treatment for like eating disorders and cutting, they were like, "This is your weight." But like I want to go below it, of course. So I guess the question is, and like I guess I came off of a binge eating before the GI issue. Like, how do you balance that? Because like you want to lean in one direction or the other. Like we're talking about drugs where it's complete abstinence. Like, it's not like, oh, I'm just going to do a little bit. It's like, no, then I'm going to do a lot. So how do you balance, like me personally, I do like the like 6 small, like, or like 3 big, like 3 small kind of meals because it works for me. But like what works for you to balance like your eating so that you're not like hungry, you're not starving, but
So I'm so early in this process still, so I'm really still trying to figure a lot of that out. I didn't mention this in my story. When I had about just under 5 years clean, I went into a eating disorder treatment facility and went through their whole process from inpatient to IOP over, 4 or 5 months or something. And so I was given a meal plan while I was there, and that was like the first foundation of somebody giving some suggestions on maybe methodology for eating. I quickly deviated from that because I wanted to be in control of my food, following getting out of that treatment facility. But something that I've adopted since being abstinent that works for me is I cut back from eating 6 times a day because I was like, also like, I need to snack throughout the day, because I found that when I was snacking throughout the day, I was spending a lot of time thinking and anticipating the next time I was going to have a snack, the next time I was going to have a meal, etc. So I've cut back to 4 times a day. So I have my 3 meals and then I have a snack at night. And pretty much I'm still figuring this out. You know, I just started seeing a nutritionist. That's a whole story because I was incredibly afraid of talking to somebody about changing the way that I eat. I've spent, you know, and this is where I say, like, unlike complete and total abstinence from drugs and alcohol, abstinence from compulsive food behaviors is a process. And so for me, the beginning of that process was just don't binge eat. And I've been successfully able to not binge eat, right? But getting that in check, the balance with the under eating side.
Are you calorie counting though?
That's
Without
what-
that, like, you know.
That's what the struggle is, and that's where it's my sponsor in that fellowship had said, you know, this is okay where you're at right now, and we'll move towards getting away from that. But I was actually, and still, like, actively am anticipating in the next week or 2 to stop, which is very scary, but counting macronutrients. So proteins, fats, carbs every single day, making sure it falls within a certain range. It's insanity, and like I recognize that.
You count them all?
And like, and I'm not saying that as like a suggestion for people to do that. I'm saying that as like, this is the process that I'm going through right now to gain more flexibility, is to transition away from that counting.
That's a lot of work.
It's incredible. Yeah. It's a lot of work and it's a lot of brain space, right?
I mean, do you have like a spreadsheet? Like not like
I use like
hitting,
an app.
Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And like it works for some people, but I
Yeah.
have to remember that like there's that idea of like we have an allergy to drugs and alcohol. You know, other people can drink and whatever. Other people can count macros, but I'm recognizing now as I'm abstinent that like I don't think I'm a person that can do that in a manageable way or in a way that doesn't cause me a lot of insanity. And so where I'm at right now is I'm doing 4 meals a day. I'm still sticking to my macros. But I'm talking to a nutritionist about getting on a meal plan that I plan to start in the next couple weeks, which is very scary because it's taking, essentially putting what could happen, you know, God forbid, if I'm not counting every single number into the hands of a professional, because I think I know what's best for me, right? But that's not true. Like, the only way I can grow with my relationship with food is to stop prioritizing it as the thing that runs every decision in my life. So part of that is putting trust in something greater than me, be it a nutritionist or my higher power or whatever, to say that like I don't need to use food as a means of control, feeling in control of my life. That can be somebody else's responsibility or something greater than me's responsibility. So that's kind of the convoluted answer to your question, is that balance means,
That's good.
A lot of fucking work.
that's the thing is that, like,
And you don't have any allergies and you're not vegan anymore.
No.
And like you don't have any health issues that prevent you from eating anything.
No,
So
I'm
it's
pretty-
like you can eat whatever you want.
that's every single stipulation I ever had on that.
What did you say?
I feel so bad for you, Eric.
I'm kind of fucked with
You
like,
can't eat anything. You're allergic to the world. Like,
I blame the drugs, I think, you know.
don't cop out the drugs.
I did a lot of drugs.
We all know this was God's fault. No, I'm kidding. I'm kidding, everybody. That was a joke. No, we're not going to go there.
I mean, we can talk about like research and like antibiotics and like someone brought that up to me about the allergy because I was on antibiotics for like 6 to 9 months, I think, when I had when I had the open wounds in my legs.
Oh, yeah.
And the food, I mean, I was on opiates I was on drugs for so long, and like I was on, you know, uppers and downers, and like I don't know.
Can you really do that? Oh, yeah, I guess.
Why wouldn't it?
Yeah, why
though?
wouldn't
I
it?
mean, like the opiates
Ingesting
are constipating
alcohol
me,
can fuck
and
your
then
liver,
like
so-
you know, uppers are like, you know, let's speed that like metabolism up and move everything through. So like maybe, you know, my favorite drugs were like coke and dope. Like maybe it fucked it up because I did it for
Speedballed your stomach to death.
I don't know. I mean, it
done fucked
happened.
up.
It
I
happened
have GI
for
tract
a long
issues
time,
as a
you
result
know?
of my food problems
Yeah.
too. I mean, like, and I know you've struggled with food issues too, and that's also just yeah.
Yeah.
Our bodies are sensitive. You know,
Yeah.
we have to treat them.
Yeah.
I have a lot of I didn't like talk about like all these things are like coming up as I'm like talking about it now.
Yeah.
I have a lot of like medical issues that are a result of my drug use, but
Yeah.
also a result of my eating that I live with today. And again, that's part of that sort of 8th and 9th step is like taking care of myself because I
Yeah.
did so much
Yeah.
terrible
That's a lot
damage
of
to
it.
myself.
Yeah.
I was reflecting on that yesterday, actually. You know, when I was at my lowest weight, my resting heart rate was like 36 beats per minute. And
fuck.
I was,
Jesus.
yeah. And, you know, I don't mind saying it. I didn't have my period for 2 years after I had already had it because my body weight was so low.
Yeah.
What the implications of that are now as an adult, I don't know. But you know, I did damage to my heart as a result of
Yeah.
undereating, like the muscular damage to my heart.
Yeah.
And so, you know, this recovery for me is life or death because I can't continue to treat my body the way that I had treated it.
Yeah. Yeah.
So,
All right.
yeah.
Okay. So what are some parallels you have found between food and substances?
It's a good question. So when I was in active addiction, I regarded drugs as, I guess, like my primary purpose, or achieving drugs and taking drugs was like my primary goal in life. It was the thing that I valued more than anything because it gave me a reprieve from like the shittiness of my mind pretty much. You know, it made me feel good in a nutshell. Similar relationship, or the work that I've done in this period, you know, fairly short period of time has revealed to me that there was very similar, I guess I had very similar sentiments about food, and that food, whether or not it was overeating and undereating, because like they both they're kind of intertwined. Like the way that they affect me is very similar, but they're different results, I guess.
Yeah.
It's
Yeah.
it's
Like chemically and psychologically,
Yes.
it's very similar because
Yeah.
like sugar will light up the same part of your brain as cocaine will.
yes.
Do you feel more shame with binge eating though
Absolutely.
than you do, right?
Yeah,
Okay.
absolutely. And that's why it's like, interestingly, I spent a really long time, not even interestingly, I just didn't talk about my binging, but I was very proud of being identified as an anorexic. I was like, that's,
Is that
yeah,
weird?
yeah, I want to be known as that. And, you know, and there's that like sick, identity piece to it, right? But for me, my value system with both drugs and food became very distorted, where every decision, everything I did while I was actively, I guess, acting on behaviors related to those things
Using them,
was oriented towards either controlling food or excessively eating food, or likewise using drugs, getting drugs, the process of like getting high. Because I regarded both of these things as something that gave me security and gave me a sense of feeling in control of my life.
Yeah.
So that's sort of the parallel for me there.
Yeah.
Is that like using these things outside of myself made me feel better about the life that I had, and that when I wasn't using them, then, you know, I was lost.
Yeah.
You know. And I still feel that way with food, and I know and it's like I'm not necessarily acting on those behaviors, but like those feelings that come, you know, when you first get clean, where you're like, how do I live without drugs? Like, how do I even exist?
Yeah, there's a level of like constant anxiety.
And that's
it's just
exactly-
like, how the fuck am I gonna do this?
And that's exactly where I'm at with food, is like, now I'm not acting on these behaviors anymore, and I'm making progress towards being better with the undereating. But there's still this part of me that's like, if I was eating right now, I'd be happier, you know?
Oh yeah.
So it's, or if I was not eating, if I just chose not to eat like today, then like I'd have a good day, right? And like I'm at that point where I'm starting to like identify that, you know, that's not necessarily my thinking. That's a disease thinking, or that's eating disorder thinking, right? But like what I value, because I've started to reprioritize my values, is sitting here with both of you, or playing a game with friends, or, you know, engaging in what recovery has offered me over the past 8 years, because I don't, like I said, I don't want to live a life clean where I'm still imprisoned by my relationship with food.
Yeah. Good.
You? Me?
Yeah,
Okay.
you. I just asked that question.
Sassy.
Well, I'm looking at the time, okay, you know, and we still have the Twitter question, so we'll see. We'll see how this
How many
goes.
more questions do I get? One?
Maybe. We'll see.
Maybe.
Find out. We'll find out.
I'm taking another question.
Let's see how it goes, you know?
Son of a bitch.
So,
I love you, Eric.
you've been in recovery for 8 years. You would be considered a hybrid at this point.
Yeah.
Ooh. Mudblood.
So, nice. I love it.
So, I'm gonna start calling us that now.
Yeah,
We're
for sure,
mudbloods.
for sure. Oh, that's great. I don't know why.
Why we haven't
Why?
done that
Yeah.
now?
Why is that
This
not?
long.
I'm a proud
yeah.
mudblood.
Yeah.
Oh, you're a sex and cocaine addict, you mudblood.
So how has your concept of recovery changed since, like, really, like, entering / starting your recovery to now?
Oh God, that's a good.
Okay. I'll try and be concise, but like I had mentioned, I came into recovery recognizing that, you know, drugs were a problem for me, but I spent a really long time being unwilling to apply a program of recovery to my relationship with food. I think that unwillingness came largely because I wanted to start talking about food, and I did talk about it with people that I knew through the fellowship that I got clean in, but I wasn't hearing people share my experience with food, at least to the level of severity that I was. And more importantly, I wasn't hearing people who had that experience and were recovering from it. Mm-hmm. You know, I'd be like, I can't, you know, people would walk up to me and be like, you're so thin right now. What's wrong with you? Or whatever. Or I might say like, you know, I feel like I'm struggling with food right now, and like some old timer company is like, yeah, I just ate like 2 cartons of ice cream last night, I'm with you on that. And it's like, that doesn't help me.
Yeah, that's not the same thing.
Yeah, exactly. And so it's like, I spent, you know, like I said, I spent a long time engaging in recovery behaviors and applying it to a lot of areas of my life, and recovery became, you know, about living in spiritual principles. But I was very much shutting my concept of a higher power off from the ability to, or I guess I was shutting myself off from having a relationship with a higher power that could give me strength and comfort in regards to food. Mm-hmm. So where I'm at today is I'm trying to let my relationship with a higher power have a hand in the decisions I make with food. I would say that for me, I don't really struggle with this disease, maybe a little bit with like shopping or whatever, but as far as like other manifestations of my disease, like the food and the drugs are the 2 major ones. And so what I've realized essentially is that like the way I need to address this disease is to give my, I guess, let something rule my life, right? Let something rule my life. I don't want to say rule, but somebody else is in charge of me, and I can put trust in that instead of feeling like I need to manipulate my food in order to like make my life better. And so it's like applying recovery in a more holistic sense. I don't know if that makes sense.
Yeah. All right. I'm going to go with a different question than I wrote down. I don't know. We've talked a lot about like difficulties with varying things, mental illness, depression, food issues, drug issues. So I'm going to switch gears and go to a positive thing. How have you built a positive relationship and positive outlook for yourself and really developed healthier modes of self-love throughout your entire recovery process?
Okay. So wait, can you like surmise that a little bit?
How have you built up your self-esteem
Okay.
throughout recovery and practice self-love?
Okay. Yeah. So a big part of that for me was, again, I participate in a 12-step fellowship, essentially working the steps because through that I was able to get more in touch with myself and reestablish, I guess, the things that I value. And as a result of kind of like, again, we say like peeling away the layers of the onion and kind of getting to the core of who I am, I started to see that like I wasn't as bad as I thought I was, that I do have value and I do have things, and that I'm capable of doing things. And so for me, like the process of working the steps has been, one of the most like loving things I was able to do for myself in recovery, because it gave me the opportunity to, one, start to like establish myself spiritually, but to get a better understanding of like who I truly am and like what I value and like what I want from my life. I would say like without a doubt, like I wouldn't have the things I have today if I hadn't gone through the process and haven't continued to go through the process of working the steps in the 12-step fellowships I participate in. Because it was through working those steps that I was able to recognize like what is the life that I want, remember like working a 7th step, and one of the questions in the guide that I was using was about like who I want to be, or like who I could see myself being. And it was like one of the first times I ever like realized that like drugs don't have a place in my life anymore. And this was again just working it from the looking at drugs and alcohol. Like the person I want to be today, and the person that like I've come to love and respect, is a person that doesn't need drugs and alcohol to achieve their goals or to be human. And so I do believe that, one, working steps, but two, applying what I learned through the steps has promoted a lot of self-acceptance and self-love.
Perfect answer. Great.
Cool.
All right, to the Twitter.
No Twitter.
No Twitter question?
Oh, man, what? No.
Did you just...
Oh, David.
What the fuck, bro?
Maybe we'll do,
You're a fucking dick.
maybe we'll do a meeting after the meeting, Maybe. See how we feel.
That's a fucking dick. Well, then I'm going to take a quick, short question.
Dude, no.
I'm taking it.
No.
What's your favorite step? Have to pick one.
I like... Ooh, pick one?
Pick one.
You've worked all 12, right?
Yeah.
Okay.
I like the 3rd step. Yeah.
Suck it, Eric. Boom. Up top.
I'm on that again in the
Recency bias. Recency bias.
It is fair. I'm living it right now.
What?
She's on it again.
So
I am,
Yeah.
but it's so relevant. Like this decision to see the nutritionist and turn.
If you were on step 10 right now, would you be like, maybe it's step 10?
I never liked step 10. Sorry. Putting it out there.
Suck
Putting
it,
out there.
Trebek.
No, but really, like,
That's what you
I'm
get.
I'm very much, if I choose to, again, frame things in a spiritual way, I see, reaching out to this nutritionist was practicing the 2nd step, recognizing that something greater than me could help me, and then following her suggestions is living the 3rd step, right? So
Mic drop.
it's
No, that's good.
Yeah, it's great.
I like it. I like the...
We just have a rivalry because I say 3, he says 10.
I do like the answer of 12, though.
12 is a good step.
I do like 12.
12,
I think
7's a
12
solid
could
one.
be... Because I like the all in all of our affairs. So I feel like people forget that a lot.
Yeah.
And like that's a really good,
Yeah.
you know,
In all of our affairs.
in all of our fucking affairs.
Yeah, it's a whole process. It's everything. I don't know. Recovery is holistic for me today.
Yeah.
You know, because it has to be. Because I know that I can't. I've learned over 8 years now that ignoring one part of my life and letting my disease manifest there does not give me the life that I want. Like I said, like I don't. If I apply that same idea that I mentioned with the 7th step, like I don't need a life where I need to feel, or I don't want to live a life, or the life I want doesn't require me to control every single macro that I count and every single thing I put in my body. That's not a life of recovery for me.
Yeah.
And so recovery for me means getting outside of that.
Yeah.
Nice.
Cool.
And she actually answered one of our normal questions right there.
Yeah.
What does recovery mean to you?
Yeah.
Perfect. All right. Well, we would like to thank our guest, Victoria, for joining us today.
Yeah.
We can't have loud noises. Those are the rules. Eric's rules. All right. Can I give her a quick minute? Yep. Quick minute. Talk to anybody listening out there who's struggling with food issues or substance issues. What do you have to say to them?
I don't know. I think the big thing for those of you who struggle with food issues is that although it seems like it's never ending and that it's impossible to get better with food, learning to live with integrity with food and eventually, I don't know, start to look at food as a normal thing is something that does happen with time, and I'm experiencing that for like the first time. And so I guess just hold on because it can get better. I'm finding myself finally gaining some freedom from food for the first time in my entire life, and you know, it's worth trying something different with food. Drugs, you know, you can cut them out. It's a process. It sucks at first, but food, living with food and learning to live with integrity with food is something that takes a lot of work, but it is definitely possible, especially through working a 12-step program.
All right. Perfect. All right. Well, again, thank you, Victoria, for joining us. Here at Podcast Recovery, we are aiming to expand the scope of support for recovering addicts. Accessibility and convenience of helpful services is paramount to combating addiction. We work to bring the message of recovery to every addict, wherever and whenever it is needed. We believe that a powerful voice of recovery should be obtainable, practical, and at the touch of a button. Every addict deserves to hear a message of hope, and Podcast Recovery is here to provide it. All right, everybody, thank you for joining us. Follow us on Twitter, follow us on Facebook, like, share, subscribe, invite your friends, come join us on the air. But most importantly, stay safe, stay clean.